March 2008, Duffy topped the UK singles and album charts. Behind her success lies a management team with a 30-year history and a legendary status in the music business.
We're saying the marketplace is a forced creation and has very little to do with the reality of what people might want given the options.
Rough Trade began life as a small but hip record shop. From humble beginnings, it grew to drive and define a revolution in independent music. As a bunch of radical idealists and maverick musicians turned the record industry on its head.
If you were DIY, Rough Trade were the perfect label for you.
Single-handedly, really, Rough Trade gave me back some kind of faith in the music industry, because up to then I just thought, it's a bunch of crooks.
But at the height of its success, Rough Trade went spectacularly bust.
It was a very black time and very hard time, and I feel grateful to still be here today, really.
Rough Trade fought its way back, and after 3 decades of defiant independence, finally made it to number 1. The Rough Trade story began more than 30 years ago. 20th of February, 1976.
Then, a few minutes later, the second bomb in a furniture shop gutted the 4-story building.
Britain was in the grip of an IRA bombing campaign.
Labour's gone on spending our earnings and spending our savings.
A future Prime Minister was beginning to make her mark on Middle England, where punk was yet to run amok. And a young Cambridge graduate called Jeff Travis opened a new shop at 202 Kensington Park Road, just off Ladbroke Grove in West London.
I've always bought records all my life, and I love music, and I was in the States for quite a long time. When I came back to London, I didn't feel like there was anywhere that I wanted to go particularly, so I thought, well, if there's nowhere to go, well, I have to start somewhere.
After I finished university, I went to visit an old girlfriend in Canada. We hitchhiked together from Chicago to San Francisco, and all along the way, I bought lots of second-hand records from Salvation Army stores, 25 cents, $1. And a friend said, what are you going to do with all those records? Why don't you ship them back to London and start a record store?
Jeff Travis named his shop Rough Trade, partly after an obscure Canadian band, partly after a trashy novel, and began to offer his friends and customers, like-minded left-wing music lovers such as Steve Montgomery, the chance to work there.
It was fun. You could listen to music all day. We had a policy as if you wanted to hear a record, we'd play it for you.
We flew off early in the years of dawn, in a metal dragon lost in time.
Rough Trade sold obscure and challenging records by bands such as American art rockers Per Ubu. Its music policy and its communal vibe set it apart from conventional commercial record shops and the middle-of-the-road rock music that dominated the music business.
I started the shop on the basis that a record shop could be something a lot more than just a place where you bought records, as though you were going into a chemist.
We were very enamoured by the idea of City Lights bookshop in San Francisco, where you could sit in the basement of the shop and drink coffee and read poetry, and you wouldn't be chucked out. And it was about being in an environment where you could just listen to music.
30 seconds over Tokyo.
It wasn't a faceless, mindless organisation attempting to exploit the general public from as much money from their pockets as you could get. We were all pretty naive, all pretty innocent, but we figured we could change the world.
West London's new music store had a clear alternative agenda. And when punk rock exploded in the summer of '76, just a few months after the shop's opening right on the doorstep of local heroes The Clash, it became a natural headquarters for punk's revolt against mainstream music.
When they released the Clash album, it was an incredible number of albums we moved in one day. It was either 1,000 or a couple of thousand. And from that moment on, the record companies all wanted to give us accounts because they saw the power that we wielded, although we didn't look at it as power. We just looked at it as, we're making this material accessible.
But the shop didn't stop at selling punk records.
From mid-1976 on, they carried the first issues of Punk magazine from New York. And Rough Trade was very important in that it started to carry English fanzines, Mark Perry's Sniffing Glue, Sandy Robertson's White Stuff, Tony D's Ripped and Torn, and they carried my fanzine, which is called London's Outrage.
Punk's homemade fanzines were the first products of a do-it-yourself attitude that would become key to Rough Trade's identity. But the shop's location, just off Ladbroke Grove, made it more than just a punk rock ghetto.
I mean, I knew Ladbroke Grove to a degree because of spending some time at Vivian Goldman's flat at 145A Ladbroke Grove, above the betting shop, next to the chip shop.
The area where the first Rough Trade store is now full of shishi boutiques and restaurants. Back then it was rough.
It's always been a bohemian area of London. It's had its history of the riots. It has its history of its Rachmanite landlords. It obviously has a huge West Indian community, and it's just been a place where it's been cheap to live. And where a place is cheap to live, you find musicians. So that was the right place for us to be, really. I mean, we weren't trying to have an upmarket shop. We just wanted to be somewhere where we felt comfortable.
It was full of squats, and it was full of music, starting from the hippie era with Hawkwind and the Pink Fairies, and then, of course, with the Caribbean community. The Rastas were all coming to Rough Trade, partly because of its location on the Carnival route, so in the very heart of the West Indian community.
In keeping with its location, Rough Trade deliberately forged what seemed an unlikely alliance between punk and reggae.
I came into Rough Trade as an outsider. To me, punk music was just spitting and vomiting and people were looking funny.
How they say in football terms, I was tapped up. I was tapped up. I was working for a company, driving around in my little escort van. We're coming down to Ladbroke Grove Station. It's on the right-hand side. So I went to Rough Trade, sold them some, I can't remember what it was, if it was a Lee Perry album or if it was a Culture album. And next week I went back, they said, can I have 50 of that? Come on, darling.
The last thing you want to be when you open a shop in the community is to be a tourist. So it was very important that we sold Jamaican music.
They kept on saying to me, come and work for us. And I thought, well, no, I don't want to work for punks, And then when I went to work there, it was like, oh, you're in charge of reggae.
The bohemian lifestyle and political activism of Ladbroke Grove, reggae's independent record scene, and punk's rebellious do-it-yourself attitude gave Rough Trade a unique and alternative spirit. In January 1977, when a record by Manchester punk band Buzzcocks appeared in the shop, Rough Trade found itself in the right place at the right time to make an impact far beyond that of a neighbourhood music store.
If I see my little jittery, I can't restrain myself. I'm falling into passive practice, can't contain myself. I'm gonna break down, I'm gonna break it down, yes.
That was my first encounter with Rough Trade. We pressed 1,000 copies of a 7-inch called Spiral Scratch. Someone rang up, can we have a couple of hundred?
What Spiral Scratch did is that it showed that you could make a great record, fund it yourself, put it out on your own label, and you could sell 15,000 copies. Bango.
When Spiral Scratch was released in 1977, the idea of putting out a single without the support of an established record company was incredible. A handful of major record companies controlled most of the power in the music industry. Rough Trade was to become the headquarters of a revolt against this corporate monopoly by stocking records by bands inspired by the idea that they could do it themselves. Bands like the Desperate Bicycles.
Well, we made a record independently, basically to show that anybody could go ahead and make a record. You didn't need the backing of a large record company or a contract or anything like that.
The medium was greedy and the outlets were clogged. The rats were biting cats again and everyone was not just another sounding lecture. Just another
Eager to empower others, the Desperate Bicycles turned their record sleeves into instruction manuals.
It was easy, it was cheap, go and do it! I think I'm telling people that they're capable too. They don't want to believe
Desperate Bicycles were really the first to demystify the process by giving the information on the record sleeve. And then a lot of other people followed.
Go and join a band!
And when the Desperate Bicycles did it, and I found their record at Rough Trade, it was like, geez, this is it.
It was easy, it was cheap, go and do it!
Who knew that you could actually ring up a pressing plant yourself and say, I want to press some records? You know, I'd grown up imagining that mere mortals couldn't do that kind of thing.
Inspired by this homemade revolution, Scritti Politti, a band of communist intellectuals, were the next punk DIYers through the Rough Trade door.
I went in with my own, our own song in '78, which was called Skank Block Bologna. That was on our own St. Pancras Records, named after the Young Communist branch of the Young Communist League that we were part of.
We had a meeting in the back office with Jeff, and then he said, oh, let's go and play it in the shop. So we went and played the demos in the shop while people were kind of flicking through. And he's kind of, did his Jeff thing. Well, and then he said, well, we like it, we'll distribute it.
Scritti Politti took the Desperate Bicycles cover design one step further by printing the production budget on the record sleeve, which was, of course, made out of paper and assembled at home.
So, recording, £98, blimey.
You had the up-to-date information, so you'd bang that information on the back of the sleeve of your record.
The main cost was the pressing, 2,500 copies at 13p, done in Surrey. Mastering, 40 quid, labels, £8.
So whoever picked that record up could then go ahead and do it.
And we just stamped these on the kitchen table.
And that was absolutely essentially important to the whole business of bothering to make music and being in a band as far as we were concerned.
That way, the record business would change, because everyone would just be able to do it themselves.
Activists like Scritti Politti and their friends at Rough Trade were the intellectual political wing of punk, anti-capitalist, democratic, and determined to break the stranglehold of the major labels.
We were Marxists, so major record labels, given what they represented at the time, would have just been the enemy.
This, our first single, was recorded quite simply in a rehearsal studio on this cassette recorder on a built-in condenser microphone.
And our second single was recorded on a borrowed reel-to-reel tape recorder at home in our front room.
Now anybody could make a record, and Jeff Travis had assembled a staff of like-minded music lovers, including local artist Shirley O'Loughlin and avant-garde Texan musician Mayo Thompson, who might sell it for them.
I would go through 20 tapes a day, 50 tapes a day, people writing and sending in tapes, wanting to be part of it, wanting to make this thing happen, wanting to make their own world happen in some way.
One review in NME and one play on Radio 1.
The mission was not rough trades all over the UK or all over the world. The mission was, here you are, you can do it.
We pressed 1,000 records, which cost us about £300, of which we sold about 350, so we lost about £150.
We would almost always take people's records, even if it was maybe only a box 25. And if it was something that was phenomenal, we'd take a lot more.
It was definitely worth doing.
Can you say that again with more enthusiasm?
Yeah, it was definitely worth doing.
But selling a few independent records over the counter was not going to change the world. In the 70s, record distribution was entirely controlled by major companies. Even early independent labels like Virgin and Island had no alternative but to hand over their distribution to the likes of EMI or CBS. But one man at Rough Trade was about to challenge this monopoly.
We started to get 5, 10, 20 letters a day saying, can we buy this because we can't buy it at our local shop? So it made sense to start up a mail order. And then once the mail order had been going for a few months, then shops were writing in and saying, you know, I can't get records from normal wholesalers. Can I buy any excess stock you have?
It was like there was a huge sort of vacuum and we were sucked into that.
Richard Scott joined Rough Trade in 1977 after managing reggae band Third World. He began by offering mail-order accounts to other independent shops around the country. Richard would go on to develop a much grander scheme that was nothing short of revolutionary: independent nationwide distribution.
One day I was trying to put together some orders for some shops. It was completely hopeless. And one of the shops that I'd been supplying was a shop in York, and I phoned up Tony Kay at Red Rhino and said, could he sell to shops in the Northeast if I sent him the stock? And he said yes. We then quickly picked up other people in other regions like Probe in Liverpool, Bax in Norwich, Fast in Edinburgh, a shop called Revolver in Bristol. It all came down to actually having control over what you were doing, of being independent, of not being subservient to a large multinational corporation.
We're saying the marketplace is a forced creation and has very little to do with the reality of what people might want given the option.
We wanted to have a distribution network where the decisions about who went into that network was controlled by ourselves and no one else. And it was born of frustration of mainstream culture being, to our mind, boring and excluding interesting things. You had the idea that ordinary people, if they were exposed to this stuff, would like it. At least they should have a chance to make up their own minds.
Rough Trade had begun to open up a commercially viable market for music overlooked or dismissed by major labels. The shop could now offer experimental musicians like Daniel Miller the chance to sell records nationwide.
I'd been a huge fan of krautrock and electronic music. I loved Kraftwerk, I loved Can, I loved Neu, and I loved punk. I'd been a frustrated musician all my life because I had music ideas but could never really play, and I thought, I'm going to try and get a synthesizer, you know, and make a punk record. I can visualize it very clearly. I went in the front door and I thought, God, this place is... I didn't think of myself as being very cool, and I think this place, God, is full of like cool dudes, and they're, you know, it's going to be very judgmental and everything. And I went to the back of the store and there was Jeff and Richard and they were dealing with a customer. And they said, just hang on a second, I was just in this place, I was looking around, I was taking it all in, it was all really exciting, all these different boxes of records and names of bands that I liked. And then we went back into the shop to have a listen to the record, and this was a public airing of my first single, you know, first public airing of my single. I was very freaked out, as you can imagine, very nervous.
TVOD, TVOD.
They said, how many do you want to press? And I said, well, I'm going to press 500 in the hope for the best. He said, well, I think you should do 2,000. We'd like to distribute it. So I said, okay, fine. And that was it, really. It was as simple as that.
I don't need a TV screen. I just stick the aerial into my skin and let the signal run through my veins.
TVOD,
TVOD.
and Warm Leather Rat, two of the most important tracks of the era. He went away, pressed the record up and started his own record label, Mute Records.
Daniel Miller set up Mute Records in 1978. It would become one of the most important and successful independent companies in Britain, selling millions of records by bands like Depeche Mode and Yazoo. It was just one of many independent labels using the Rough Trade distribution network.
There'd be Dick O'Dell coming in, He was managing the Slits and the pop group and had Y Records. There was like people coming down like from Postcard Records. Tony Wilson would come in at least once a month to talk about Factory because we were manufacturing and distributing their label. Just like people just coming in all the time, you know.
Independent labels were beginning to make a significant impact on the major companies' control of the music market. And so it seemed almost inevitable that when a bunch of French punks wandered into the shop in 1978, Rough Trade was prompted to become a record label in its own right.
We had been distributing a record by this French group, Metal Urbain. And I was behind the counter and they gave me a cassette and they said, "We don't know what to do with it, can you help us in any way?" And that was the eureka moment where I thought, well, we could press this up and put it out ourselves.
The Rough Trade label was born, and by the end of the year, it had released a dozen singles by an eclectic mix of post-punk artists, who found the label's attitude towards record contracts typically subversive. Music industry orthodoxy dictated that record companies offer new artists a cash advance, contractually binding them for a number of albums for which they will receive a modest percentage of any sales profit. It was a notoriously exploitative arrangement. Rough Trade had a much simpler deal.
Clause 1. Rough Trade and ... agreed to make records and sell them until either or both of the parties reasonably disagree with the arrangement. Clause 2. We agreed that once agreed recording, manufacturing and promotional costs have been deducted, we will share the ensuing profit equally.
We knew that if we'd have gone with a major, then it was a lot more complex sort of negotiations. For us, it was like, yeah, that makes sense. Costs taken out 50-50, you know, it's all good.
The way in which the music business approaches the problem of dealing with someone that's making music is, I think, delineated by the fact that they're going to make some money out of this. They're pushed into seeing it as a commodity that they have to sell. And I mean, we're very opposed to seeing any of the people that we deal with, any of the music that we sell, simply as a commodity.
You know, you could say that really, in business terms, we were very naive. And had we been interested in building an empire, we would have behaved very differently. We would have signed artists to long-term deals. We would have made sure that we had the copyrights, right for copyright. We would have made sure that we had a publishing company. We never did any of those things. And why didn't we do them? It's because we weren't interested in building an empire. We weren't trying to follow the capitalist model of how do you accumulate wealth. You know, we weren't trying to be Virgin Records.
Rough Trade's ethic was directly opposed to the conventions of the music industry. Here was a business collective that put principles before profit, run by a bunch of enthusiasts who wore their politics proudly.
Politics was very kind of special to us. At a very early stage, it was decided that it was going to be an equal pay, non-management structure.
Rough Trade was kind of based on the principles of a kind of beat culture, kibbutz collective. Everyone was paid the same. We had an environment where there was an equality of the sexes. And you felt like you were participating in culture and the community and you were building something. You weren't really building your future because you were just living in the present.
For a brief moment in time, we encapsulated everything that was right about the human race.
I don't know how many of you out there are actually thinking of joining pop groups.
And when Rough Trade signed this bunch of Belfast punks in 1978, they became not just an alternative ideological force, but genuine competitors in the commercial music world.
We started off
recorded our own first single. I got in touch with Rough Trade, and they started to sell copies of that single for us. When it came to the second single, they asked us could they pay the costs and so forth, and go into it on a joint venture. At the moment, we're considering just continuing that way because it's on a straight 50-50 partnership.
Signing Stiff Little Fingers was a major coup for Rough Trade. Most successful punk bands, despite their anti-establishment roots, were signed to major record companies.
The Sex Pistols signed to EMI, famously ended up on Virgin. The Clash signed to CBS. So they were the two leaders, really.
If we signed for CBS tomorrow, all the kids on the street would say, what a sellout. And the chances are very good. Our share of record sales would be at most a half of what we're making at the moment.
In February 1979, Rough Trade and Stiff Little Fingers' first album was released. It went to number 14 in the charts, becoming the first independent album in British music history to sell over 100,000 copies.
The day we made that record available, I looked out the window on Kensington Park Road and there were 20 taxis, 10 messenger bikes, they were all there waiting for it. And as soon as it was released, off it went into the world. It was like, whoa, people do give a damn about this stuff. It's amazing.
We were just in total chaos. I remember there was just records flying in the front door and flying out at the same time.
Stiff Little Fingers album, Rough One, was our very first album. And miraculously, it was hugely successful. It sold 100,000 copies in virtually no time at all. And it put the label on the map. And it made us say to ourselves, you know what? This isn't that hard, is it?
The Stiff Little Fingers album was a payoff for an idealism. Clash didn't really need to go to CBS. Stiff Little Fingers proved that.
I mean, 100,000 copies, that generates a huge amount of turnover. And that in itself was the building bricks on which the label was able to go forward. That was the cash flow that enabled us to do other records.
Hello, Mike, how are you?
Stiff Little Fingers' breakthrough was a key moment for the independent sector. It showed Rough Trade that one band's success could fund a whole bunch of less commercial records, as bands like the Raincoats happily discovered.
When the phone from Rough Trade saying the record is here, and I just walked down and I just felt, I was on top of the world, completely.
The Raincoats were not alone, as the label began to build a roster of artists that fulfilled the Rough Trade ethos of offering a diverse alternative to mainstream music.
Metal Urbane, Dr. Nix, who were kind of, Metal Urbane's alter ego.
Essential Logic, Young Marble Giants, Scritti Politti,
The Fall,
Television personalities,
Ivor Cutler,
Swell Maps,
Pop Group,
and then of course there were Kleenex,
Delta 5,
Slits,
The Electric Eels, fantastic single,
Space Energy,
Robert Wyatt,
James Blood Elmer, who later worked with, or had worked with Ornette Coleman.
Subway Sector Course seems like such an important record. It's only one single. And there was all this sort of electronic stuff. Or they were doing the production and distribution for independent record labels like Throbbing Gristle, Industrial Records, which at the time was selling absolutely potloads of stuff.
The variety that you find on major labels is just, do you like this kind of music or do you like that kind of music? What kind of party are you having? Just get you one of these, everything's going to happen just like that. In the Rough Trade, you met a variety and a range of people who didn't have a look in the mainstream industry and who wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell if that's all there was to it.
By 1979, while Rough Trade was beginning to find its feet as a label, Rough Trade Distribution was becoming a serious player in the music business, driving sales for a nationwide network of increasingly successful independent labels, companies like Two Tone, who'd signed The Specials.
Here came somebody with something who used Rough Trade distribution, and they came down and they had that Al Capone single.
I remember going down with the band to Ireland, who were pressing it, coming back to the Rough Trade office with all the boxes. And then we all sat round, you know, with a rubber stamp, pressing these records just to go downstairs and get distributed.
Rough Trade realized that it could marshal its forces around something and actually make it happen. And we sold 375,000 of those singles. That was the shift, in my mind, to an understanding that it could service on the entry end where people came in and had with ideas, and it could also service on the outgoing idea. If people like that, no problem, we got it for you.
When Rough Trade began in 1976, there were about a dozen independent labels in Britain. By the end of the decade, there were over 800. Rough Trade Distribution was at the hub of this explosion of independent music, and the label had redefined the politics of record production. The music industry would never be the same again.
Stiff Little Fingers are about to embark on a fairly grueling tour of the UK, but they are with us here tonight just before they do that with their single At the End.
In 1980, Rough Trade's socialist radicals moved into new offices around the corner from the shop. They were just one of a growing movement of left-wing collectives like City Limits magazine and activist groups like Rock Against Racism that challenged the ideology of Margaret Thatcher's recently elected Conservative government.
It was an era when kind of moral values, respect for your fellow man, an egalitarian sense of just brotherhood really and sisterhood came to the surface in a corrupt dog-eat-dog world, you know.
Rough Trade represented a serious alternative to the cutthroat corporate music industry. The shop had become a mecca for independent music. Richard Scott's distribution operation was expanding by the day. Jeff Travis had released over 30 singles on the Rough Trade label, and its debut album had smashed the chart monopoly of the major labels. Rough Trade's biggest problem was holding on to bands once they'd broken through. And by the time Stiff Little Fingers made it to Top of the Pops in 1980, they were no longer a Rough Trade band.
The ironic thing about Stiff Little Fingers was they couldn't wait to sign to a major straight after they'd made their Rough Trade record.
And then it dawned on us, we had a brain drain problem. So there was always this anxiety about losing talent.
If we don't respond in some sense to the growth of our band by a certain amount of growth, all it means is that we will be a nursery ground for every major label that exists in this country. And it doesn't seem in the long run as though that's a very good idea, because all it means is that you give the band a chance to live out their ideals for a few years, and then they go and join, a corporation, and whatever happens up to them after that, will happen, and it's very debatable whether that's good or bad. We think it's bad.
Rough Trade's principled refusal to tie artists to conventional record deals made the threat of losing its biggest bands ever present. Reconciling its alternative business ethic with the need to make a profit would prove a major issue throughout the 80s. It was a decade that would also raise some difficult questions about what kind of music Rough Trade should or shouldn't be releasing. A debate brought sharply into focus in 1981 when one of the label's most radical artists announced a drastic change in direction.
Well, really what happened was I started to have panic attacks, so I didn't realise that's what they were at the time. I ended up in hospital in Brighton. I hadn't spoken to my parents for very many years, so they got in touch and took me back to Wales, where I was born, and tried to help me get myself back together. And whilst I was there, I took the opportunity to take stock, really, of what we were up to. And I listened to lots of records that I hadn't really listened to before, black American pop music. So there was a discovery of black pop music and reading of lots of European thinkers, all of which ended up with me deciding that we should try and make pop music.
Making pop music meant swapping the low-tech, homemade aesthetic that Scritti Politti had already pioneered on 2 Rough Trade EPs for expensive studio production and a slick sound.
Technically, it was a new frontier. I didn't know how to write a pop song, and I wanted to find out how you did it.
The resulting record was Scritti Politti's bid for chart success, but not everybody approved.
It was a significant moment. Significant in as much as I think there were, there were lots of people at Rough Trade that kind of, didn't like it.
At the time, there was this question about, whether you like very commercial music or not. And there was also a whole ideology going on within local culture, as it were, of independence versus mainstream, of non-commercial versus commercial. And I just thought this was shadow boxing. I didn't see it as making much difference to, the balance of power in the world between rich and poor, what kind of records you made. I just couldn't see the connection.
But producing expensive, radio-friendly pop music seemed at odds with Rough Trade's alternative agenda. To some, this was tantamount to chasing hits and selling out.
The Sweetest Girl cost £60,000. Now here's a record company, Rough Trade, who's like very careful with its budgeting. I don't know what it is. It's like, we're gonna take over, really are gonna take over the world. God damn. I don't know if it's drinking too much of your own piss, starting to believe your own publicity, or what. I don't know.
That was the first evidence of a sort of cancer. Evidence of people swimming uphill to try and compete in the music industry where we were actually doing all right by being outside of it.
It was this kind of moment of like, oh, we need to plug records, we need to kind of sell lots of records, we need to kind of make really polished music, we need to have hits.
Well, this is a very interesting charge. I mean, I just don't think that I've ever gone looking for a hit in anything that I've ever thought about. I think there's a very different thing when somebody makes a hit and gives you a hit. And I think Scritti Politti's Sweetest Girl is, without a shadow of a doubt, worthy of being a hit.
The Sweetest Girl's highest chart position was 64 in 1981. It wasn't a hit. Undeterred, Rough Trade went on to sign another, more commercially focused band.
Contemporaries of Orange Juice, some 3 years ago on the Postcard label, and now tasting the heady wine of success on the Rough Trade label with their first LP. So could you please welcome to the studio, Aztec Camera.
There began to be these discussions going around the office that I'd hear about how we can disguise the socialist political agenda and make it pop, and so we'll get kids singing along to pop records with this agenda that they were going to be able to push across to Top of the Pops or something. And there began to be all this weird talk about whether it would sell or not, which had never been their modus.
I think that people forget that Stiff Little Fingers was a big commercial success, that we were distributing records that were hits. It was never part of the Rough Trade project to shy away from the mainstream if the mainstream came to Rough Trade, but we never went running after it.
Three lads from Glasgow woke up this morning to find that their single had leapt into the top 20. Can you believe it? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aztec Camera.
When Aztec Camera did make it into the charts in 1983, just like Stiff Little Fingers before them, they'd left Rough Trade. And a year later, when Scritti Politti finally made the top 10, they too had signed to a major. It seemed that the label couldn't deliver a hit, even if it had wanted one.
We were still very young as a record company. We still had a huge amount to learn about the apparatus of selling records, of sales forces, of sales teams, of making deals with supermarkets, of making sure that we were as competitive as the next person.
But just as Scritti Politti left Rough Trade, their guest keyboard player did unexpectedly crack the top 40.
One of the few songs inspired by the recent Falklands War was called Shipbuilding. It was written by Elvis Costello and Clive Manger and performed by Robert Wyatt. Now, it won various critics' polls as the best single of last year, and now it's been re-promoted by Rough Trade in an effort to give it the success it deserves.
Jeff Travis signed Robert Wyatt in an attempt to rescue an important artist from musical obscurity. Hit records were not on the agenda.
We were trying to earn a living. I hadn't been in the wheelchair that long. I've been in a wheelchair since hospital 73, came out, put a record out 74. And I just got in a panic after a while. The record company I was officially with, although I didn't want to be with, didn't allow me to make any LPs for anybody else, even though I couldn't make any for them either. And Jeff said, well, let's make some singles then. The great thing about making singles for Jeff was their commercial potential was ignored. It was just as well.
Robert Wyatt took Shipbuilding, an anti-war protest song, to number 36 in 1982. It displayed Rough Trade's political credentials and chimed with the label's support for other left-wing campaigns.
It's almost as if the great unconscious of pop musicians has slightly been pricked by a few things in the past few months, and I think it's wonderful.
The charge that Rough Trade was only interested in chasing hits was also at odds with a roster that included Mark E. Smith's uncompromising band of maverick Mancunians, The Fall.
Something to dance to, a certain kettle style.
I wasn't expecting Mark to have a hit. I was just expecting him to continue to make great records.
Lousy celebrity makes record.
Records by The Fall, Pere Ubu, Cabaret Voltaire and the Swell Maps proved Rough Trade's commitment to challenging and alternative music. And even without hit records from the label, Rough Trade Distribution's turnover was huge. Ad hoc arrangements with independent record stores had been formalized into a sales network called The Cartel, which supplied over 300 shops with records from over 500 labels. But as some of these labels began to enjoy massive sales, it became obvious that in business terms, Rough Trade's inexperienced staff were way out of their depth.
I stand still stepping on the shady street and I watched that man to a stranger.
We had no business experience in those days. We had to make it up as we went along. And as a result of just the pure volume going through and so on and so forth, we actually ran into financial difficulties fairly regularly.
I think the first problem arose out of the Joy Division record, Unknown Pleasures. They ran out of money before they could pay Factory. A similar thing happened with Mute as well, because Mute had two big records, the first Depeche Mode record and then the first Yazoo record.
Complicating, circulating, new life.
And again, the money wasn't managed very well, so that by the time it came around to pay me, they'd already spent the money, basically.
Following a series of cash flow crises, Rough Trade brought in its first qualified accountant in 1982. He found the company was close to going bust. A financial audit revealed that the company owed money it simply didn't have. The record label and distribution system were Rough Trade's core activities. If they were to be saved, everything else would have to be sacrificed. That meant disposing of the shop.
You know, I don't know too much about that. I have to say, I think I must have been distracted by something else because I was, I can't remember being particularly party to discussions about what was going to happen to the shop. So that's lost to me in that difficult period.
We were called in to a meeting, as I recall, sort of individually, and told that they were going to shut the shop. We felt kind of betrayed. And so we went back to Jeff and said, if we can keep the name, can we carry on with the shop?
In December 1982, 6 years after opening, the Rough Trade shop was sold to 3 of its staff. They kept the name and still run the shop today. Financial collapse for now had been averted, but the crisis exposed the rift between the label and Rough Trade's distribution arm.
Jeff asked me to leave at that time, just completely out of the blue, which came as a bit of a shock. But after talking to others there, I was then persuaded not to.
Who asked him to leave?
He said that you did.
Well, yeah, I can't remember. What was it? I wonder what he did. I think he was being more and more antagonistic, really. But yeah.
He thought that I'd been personally responsible for some of the worst losses. I could then never actually regard or deal with Jeff in the same way.
From that point on, it seemed to me that the record label became completely the sort of domain of Jeff, whereas the distribution was, being masterminded by Richard.
The conflict between record label and distribution would never be resolved. The communal vibe of Rough Trade's early days seemed a long way away.
Where before you could relax and do your thing and get through, now you had to be, you had targets, you had this to do, and if you didn't keep the targets, they'll be meeting why haven't you kept your targets. So there's a lot of pressure put on people. That mood of, you can kick back and I'll do it tomorrow, all that had gone. And then you got people starting getting worried because of job security, when if this wasn't selling or this group didn't do their thing or didn't sell enough units. And Rough Trade, we never talked about selling records as units.
Rough Trade's rapid growth had raised some difficult dilemmas. Distribution demanded increased record sales to drive its ever-expanding operation. The record label needed commercial success, but fiercely guarded its independent identity, built on the alternative credibility of its music. The perfect solution to all these problems came from a pair of ambitious songwriters from Manchester.
The only way that I could find any mental relaxation is to simply go out and walk, which can seem quite depressing to most people. But for me, it was perfect fuel, because then I would go home and I would write furiously. And I found that, for me, it was a brilliant outlet. It was the thing that helped. But also, you have to have a grain of hope, which is a very difficult thing to have.
The first day that we were officially like a partnership, which was the second time we got together, part of our get-together was just making this almost like mental wish list, if you like. And part of that conversation was we should sign to Rough Trade Records.
On a Friday afternoon in April 1983, Johnny Marr walked into the Rough Trade offices with a demo tape.
I said I wanted to see Jeff Travis, and I was kind of hustled out, really. But I kind of hung around, kind of pretending to be like doing stuff with records, and I was in there for an hour or two. And then I saw Jeff come out of his office, and I think he was a little taken aback. I think I actually grabbed his sleeve and stopped him because he was trying to get away. And I gave him this cassette and I said, I'm from Manchester, this is my band, The Smiths, and something along the lines of, you won't have heard anything like this before.
I took it home that weekend and listened to it about 20 times. and was really intrigued by it.
Hand in glove, the sun shines out above behind. No, it's not like any
You couldn't really make out the words, but it was something wonderful.
To Jeff's absolute credit, he called first thing on Monday and just said, this is the best thing I've heard for ages, and I want to sign it to Rough Trade, I want to put this single out. And it was like, okay, bullseye, that's what we're going to do.
The Smiths and Rough Trade were a perfectly timed marriage. The original impact of the post-punk, new wave and new romantic movements had passed. It was time for something new. That something was indie music, and it began with the Smiths.
I grew up on the Smiths. I mean, they defined my teenage years completely. So the first time I saw the name Rough Trade was on the back of Hand in Glove, the first Smith single. I didn't know Jeff Travis, didn't know Rough Trade, I didn't know anybody, I was a schoolboy. But the way I saw it was that it was a battle. It was alternative and independent, and to major record companies, that was a dirty word. They were the enemy. Rough Trade was the enemy. They were seen as just infiltrators, out to spoil the party. And groups like the Smiths were out to spoil the party for Simple Minds and Wet 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 and all this kind of rubbish. You know, it was just rubbish.
Facing fierce competition, Rough Trade abandoned the principle of the no-ties 50-50 deal, and for the first time in its history, offered the band a conventional record contract, a long-term deal that guaranteed the label 4 albums.
The majors started inviting us to meetings and got interested in us, but we didn't want to be on a major and Rough Trade didn't want to be majors. It was a really great partnership.
Johnny puts the music down on a cassette, and he gives me the cassette, and I live with the cassette for a few days, and I just wheedle words into the cassette, and then we just all get together, and it just happens at the drop of a cassette.
Rough Trade gave the Smiths independent credibility. Morrissey and Marr put their new label into the charts at number 25, with release number 136.
When This Charming Man came out, it wasn't just that things were going in the right direction. I mean, it was like the sun came out for the label and the band and the fans and fans of indie music.
There was a big difference between This Charming Man and Club Tropicana. You know, there was a big fucking difference to me. It meant the world to me that I could explain what that difference was to almost everybody I met.
I would go out tonight, but I haven't got a stitch to wear.
What they made me recognise was that pop records were a great art form. 3 minutes could change your life completely, or they could make you get out of the dreary existence you had and save you from it.
A jumped up country boy.
To promote its first hit single, Rough Trade hired London Records, a major label sales force, and mounted an expensive marketing campaign.
I would go out tonight, but I haven't got a stitch to wear.
It was certainly unusual for Rough Trade to be spending a lot of money on this blanket poster campaign. But it wasn't an issue of them sitting around going, oh, you know, does it go against our principles? They were like, we've got a record that demands a poster campaign. Fantastic, it's all going to come together. They were still Rough Trade Records, doing things in an independent way, and they had a band who wanted to be with them, who were about to have this big run of singles. And they were high on the success they were about to have as a label, and we were high on our success. And it was like a perfect kind of union at that time.
A string of Smith's hits followed, but there were internal murmurings of discontent as Rough Trade sales strategies began to mimic the marketing machines of the major labels.
Their LP called The Smiths is coming out on February the 24th, and they've got a hit single called What Difference Does It Make?
You break a single the first week, right? And then the third week it's crucial. Does it drop or does it go up to 36?
Here they are, The Smiths. This week's number 20. What difference does it make?
If it goes up to 36, oh, you might break it. Get a plugger. You start getting more and more professionals in, more and more expertise. You apply these, these devices to this thing and try to make it happen in some terms. You start playing the game.
Number 23 this week, The Smiths. Would you like to marry me? And if you like to come by the ring.
I can remember Jeff saying to me one day that Morrissey was going to be the new Boy George. And I remember thinking, is that what I'm coming to work for? Is that what we really need? And I was astounded that there was that kind of change.
We only have one thing to say to that. But heaven knows I'm miserable now.
Things had changed. I had appointments at Vernon Yard with the guy who ran Virgin Records, and I was negotiating with him about how many signed copies of Smith's records he was going to get, who was going to get the T-shirts. Suddenly we had licensing in Germany, Austria, the gas territories, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Suddenly, it's in Japan we have a record out. You got to satisfy Woolies, you got to satisfy Our Price, you got to satisfy Virgin, you got to satisfy HMV. You're part of a machine.
For the label, I think it was definitely a period of re-evaluation internally, because it was quite dogmatic, this collective, democratic, immovable model that it had set itself up as. But it really needed to move forward, and Jeff in particular, I think, wanted that and knew that.
They were the best group around. They were making music that, even though it was strange, it was still hugely commercial potential. And I think if we were going to have any chance of keeping them, and perhaps by then I would got fed up of losing these artists and thought, well, we need to do this job properly now.
Rough Trade was becoming more business-orientated. In 1984, Richard Scott secured the lease on a warehouse near King's Cross, and the company left its spiritual home in West London. This would be the new headquarters of a now global outfit with offices throughout Europe and in America. Rough Trade had never been so big or so profitable. Qualified professionals were recruited to manage its growth, and they demanded changes to the business that meant sacrificing many of Rough Trade's original collective values.
I think that too much of the record industry is like the civil service, where there's a fear of making a decision in case you make a mistake, and if you make no decision, you can't make a mistake, therefore you keep your job. But that's not how rock and roll got started. Suddenly, it had gone from being me and a few other crazy people into something that was about 40, 60, 80, 100 people, and it was a big organisation. And with the big organisation came a board which met to make decisions, and an influx of a more professional middle management kind of creature who spoke a kind of language which just was gobbledygook. It was lingo, it was kind of something they learned from a book, and that really was not helpful.
I was one of those people. I was one of those middle managers that was brought in. Still in that period where everybody was being paid the same salary, £7,800. And you really couldn't get people to come in and manage it for £7,800.
In 1987, Geoff Travis and a handful of the original staff handed over control of Rough Trade to a management trust. It meant the introduction of differential pay and departmental structures, a whole new way of working.
It was just a very difficult transition, and it was a hard transition for Geoff, he was turning over something that he started to other people who, in his mind, probably had no vested interest in music. We didn't care less about the music, which was as far removed from what Rough Trade was, when it first started.
But far from making Rough Trade a leaner outfit, the new structure was bureaucratic and unwieldy, and inflamed the ongoing rift between distribution and the record label.
There's a power struggle, really. And I think my mistake was that I was not interested in the power struggle. And I was very quickly marginalised on the board so that anything I said, no one took very seriously, and distribution went its own way.
By that time, there was war between distribution and the record company. You couldn't guarantee you're always going to have a hit record, so sometimes you're having a bad season, right? But distribution's always there, increasing in power, increasing in power, increasing in power, and then then Rough Trade gets to be just another label which is served by the distribution company that has started.
Panic on the streets of London, panic on the streets of Birmingham. I wonder to myself.
War was also brewing on another front. Despite a #1 album and 6 top 20 singles by 1986, the Smiths' relationship with Rough Trade was becoming increasingly antagonistic.
Studio time was always at a minimum. For me, that was a bit of a problem. Some records didn't arrive at some places on time occasionally. There was some issue with that Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, where I think there weren't enough records pressed. And band had no manager, so the two principal members of the group are dealing with the label. And it's like any relationship, you know, you spend a lot of time together and there's a lot of issues and a lot of things at stake. So like things get blown out of proportion. I mean, Rough Trade weren't exactly blameless, but it wasn't like a catalogue of catastrophe or anything like that.
Burn down the disco, hang the blessed DJ, because the music that they come.
I mean, Morrissey always used to say things like, "We're never on the radio." And of course, they were on the radio. They did have a series of hit records, but I think they just felt they should have more. And I mean, that's understandable but irrational. I mean, the Smiths were not making, you know, anodyne, pretty pop records for 14-year-old girls. Therefore, they're not going to sell as many records as Duran Duran. It's just a fact of life. You have to get used to that, Morrissey.
Sweetness, sweetness, I was only joking when I said by rights you should be bludgeoned in your bed.
During the recording of the third album, The Queen is Dead, in 1986, the Smiths tried to sign to EMI. Yet again, Rough Trade looked set to lose its biggest act, but this time it had the protection of a contract.
We were stupid. You know, we had a couple of people around us who gave us incorrect and bad advice. You know, and this lawyer saying, well, go and sign to someone else and shop him for a deal, and we didn't really have the rights to do that. And Rough Trade said, hang on a minute, you know, you owe us a couple more albums. So it caused this sort of like standoff, and then we were told, this record that you're working on is going to be injuncted. This lawyer told me that. And that was a bit of a buzz killer. You know, when you're trying to make a record, like, guess what? It's not going to come out. Right.
Because they didn't have a manager, they lacked any kind of voice that gave them some semblance of reality. I think that's what destroyed them.
We didn't have calming, organising presence. And that led to a lot of chaos and a lot of drama and a lot of neurosis, and ultimately the band's demise. But all of that drama and intensity went into the music. You can hear it in the music.
The Queen is Dead was released on Rough Trade, but after the next record, the Smiths were free to leave. Strange Ways Here We Come was to be their last release on Rough Trade, but the band was falling apart, and it would be their last album, full stop.
In the end, they signed to EMI, and they never gave EMI a record.
I am the sun and the air.
The Smiths' departure was demoralizing, but income from their sales continued to roll in long after they'd gone, and the future was far from bleak.
Used to do it once, do it twice, every single time will be twice as nice, really.
By 1989, the label had its biggest roster of artists to date, including the Wooden Tops and the Sundays, whose debut album reached number 4 in the UK charts.
England, my country, the home of the free, such miserable weather.
but indie music was becoming mainstream, as every major label rushed to sign jangly, guitar-driven Smith sound-alikes. The real independent spirit had shifted to an emerging scene that was the most revolutionary musical movement since punk. When the rave scene exploded at the end of the 80s, Rough Trade Records seemed to have missed the boat. But Rough Trade Distribution had embraced a new wave of independent labels driving the dance music revolution. And its expansion continued apace.
The lyrics will flow, yo, for the words I speak. Rap is weak, so I teach and I reach a positive vibe, a way of life is
When I joined Rough Trade in that first year in '86, it was something like an £8 million a year turnover. And within 3 years, it went to 25 million.
What time is love?
By the end of the decade, distribution accounted for 90% of Rough Trade's overall turnover of around 40 million. In July 1990, the company once again moved to bigger premises. But despite its growth and professional management, the move was just one of a series of disastrous decisions and financial blunders which, combined with political infighting, brought Rough Trade, at its financial peak, crashing to the ground.
We moved to a building without disposing of a previous lease. So there's a period when we were paying 2 buildings. Can't do that. Distribution bought a computer for £250,000.
It didn't work.
They were unfortunate to be hit by some credit control issues, where other companies went bankrupt, owing Rough Trade a lot of money. And from my point of view, the people from distribution just disappeared.
The senior salespeople left because they could see no end to the arguments with Jeff. And once they'd gone, the management structure ceased to exist.
It wasn't really anyone's fault, it just grew too big. And there was a lack of collective will on the board, or an ability or an experience to work together to solve these problems. And that's what happened, I think.
Jeff, I've read saying things about the bad management at the end. Well, I mean, Jeff didn't even turn up to board meetings. So the whole thing had fallen apart.
In the end, it was simple cash flow mismanagement that sealed Rough Trade's fate.
They're having a huge amount of success. All the money was going into the warehouse, all the money was going into the software. Jeff was releasing quite a lot of records at that time. And cash flow projections were either incorrect or ignored, and they ran out of cash.
In December 1990, hamstrung by a series of unpaid distribution debts, and despite a record annual turnover, Rough Trade's cash flow ground to a halt. By March 1991, 2/3 of the staff had been axed, the administrators were called in, and Rough Trade's assets were frozen.
I probably very nearly went under. Because the pressure of it was really awful day to day, the responsibility. It was a very, very difficult time. A very black time and very hard time, and I feel grateful to still be here today, really. But it taught me a lot.
The company that sold its first record in February 1976 ceased trading on June 1st, 1991. Its demise marked the end of an era. 15 years in which a bunch of idealistic hippies and punks had written the rulebook for the production and distribution of independent music.
Last night I dreamt that somebody loved me.
At the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, when we all started, nobody knew what the fuck they were doing, okay? We didn't have to deal with selling records overseas, we didn't really know that much about distribution, we didn't know about copyright, we didn't know about anything. By the end of the 80s, people like Newt, Rough Trade Factory, KLF, Beggars, had big worldwide success with their artists, not even just UK, but worldwide. And were very happy to share any information they could with people who wanted it, All the kind of myths have been busted by that point. So actually, The irony is that it was probably one of the most successful periods of independent music ever in Britain, at the point at which Rough Trade went bust.
At their peak in the 80s, independent labels commanded a 40% share of the record market. Major record companies had begun setting up their own in-house boutique labels, branding them as apparently independent, and signing up indie bands who were now seen as mainstream artists, releasing music once viewed as marginal and alternative. Geoff Travis, Rough Trade and their independent allies had radically reshaped the musical landscape. And although the company had been dismantled, its assets, including the name itself, stripped down and sold off, the Rough Trade story was not over yet. In 1991, Geoff Travis moved into an office about half a mile from the original Rough Trade shop with his new business partner, Jeanette Lee. They would go on to revive and reinvent Rough Trade.
The formula with Geoff and myself is really quite simple. It's like if we get really excited about something, we just totally go for it.
In the 80s, Jeanette Lee had been part of Public Image Limited, the band formed by John Lydon after the demise of the Sex Pistols. She had also worked with Geoff Travis at Rough Trade for several years prior to the company's collapse. Now they set to work on a number of new musical projects. And one day in 1993, they met a troubled musician who would draw them into the world of artist management.
We'd kind of got ourselves into a bit of a mess. We had the remnants of an old record deal with an unscrupulous independent label. Island Records wanted to sign us, but once they heard about all these kind of complications and all this stuff, they just wouldn't come near us, wouldn't touch us with a barge pole. And it was a friend just said, why don't you go and talk to Geoff Travis?
He sat in this office and he told us his sorry tale. And, you know, we liked him and we were very excited about it. And so we took on the task of managing them, and we spent a lot of time disentangling the legal mess they were in and effecting the signing to Ireland, and it all worked out.
Single-handedly, really, Rough Trade, Geoff and Jeanette, gave me back some kind of faith in the music industry, because up to then I just thought, it's a bunch of fucking crooks.
She came from Greece, she had a thirst for knowledge. She studied sculpture at St. Martin's College, that's what I called her eye.
Geoff and Jeanette had become an artist management team, and with Pulp signed to Island Records, they began to apply their independent ethic to the world of major label pop stardom.
She said, I wanna live like common people. I wanna do what...
There was this thing in record companies, maybe to justify the jobs, they were always coming up with strategies of how you got a good chart position or how you sustained your chart position. Like, you know, like that spray that you spray on your cock to keep it hard. And at the time when Common People was due to come out, the big thing was formats, split the format. One CD comes out week 1, week 2, the other CD comes out. You don't go in as high, but you sustain, and that's what's important.
You wanna live like common people.
We'd waited over a decade to have a chance at some kind of pop stardom, and we just said, well, we're not really interested in sustaining. We just kind of want to go in, you know, full force, and if it fucks off the next week, then fair enough, whatever.
And she just smiled and held my hand.
If we'd have been managed by anybody else, I'm sure that wouldn't have happened, but they backed us with that and we managed to get it through. And, you know, it was our finest hour. We went in the charts at number 2. From that point on is where Pulp's kind of success story came from, really.
Beginning with Common People in 1995, Pulp enjoyed a string of 5 consecutive top 10 singles, For Jeff and Jeanette, even after the achievements of the Smiths, this was a new level of mainstream success.
In managing Pulp, we had to interact with a big major. So we learned how to play the game in a different way, really, and interact with people that were more mainstream and make it successful. I think we learned a lot, actually.
With Pulp, Jeff and Jeanette had a series of hit records. What they didn't have was a record label, or even the Rough Trade name, which had been sold along with the other assets when the company folded. But in 2001, at a party to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Rough Trade shop, Jeff and Jeanette decided to bring Rough Trade Records back to life.
I think probably Jeff clicked into some kind of gear again that night, where he just thought, this is worth doing again.
Everyone just kept saying Rough Trade, it's a wonderful thing, it's a great thing, and it just sort of made us realise, it dawned on us that actually, it meant a lot to a lot of people. We decided that we would make another attempt to buy the name back. And so we started, and the first thing we did was sign the Strokes.
The timing was perfect. By sheer coincidence, a few months earlier, Jeff Travis had received a tape that would lead to New York and quite possibly the best unsigned band on the planet.
They were playing around the New York club circuit. They hadn't even really played outside of New York. I was in the mood where I was kind of sending out their demo to everybody, just trying to get them gigs or some attention or some love.
Jeff comes in earlier than me. Okay, let's admit it. And I came in one morning and he was blasting out some music and called me straight into his office and said, listen to this, and it was really exciting.
I posted it out, and 2 days later, I'd walk into work at 10 a.m. and Jeff rings up. He's like, we'd like to put this out.
They didn't really believe us or take us very seriously, so we decided to go to New York to meet them.
We're like, man, this is the place where we're going to play for the label. There's no one there. It's just a few friends and a few strangers.
There was nobody there. There was just a bunch of people that had gone out on a Saturday night for a drink. We've got to make this happen.
Well, it's time for a brand new band from America, and they are tipped for great things, and we agree. These are the Strokes.
Making it happen meant putting out an EP, bringing the band to England, and employing all of the marketing skills they'd learnt while working with Pulp to show the Strokes what Rough Trade was capable of.
The press and everything just lit fire over there. It was really wild.
We marketed the Strokes in a way that we hadn't marketed anyone else really to that point. We realised that this was the time that we had to do all that kind of stuff that hadn't happened in the past.
Rough Trade had turned the Strokes from an anonymous bar band into the hottest property of the year. What they hadn't done was ask them to sign a record contract.
We found ourselves in a situation where we loved this band, we really wanted to work with them more than anything, but now everybody knows about them and everybody wants to sign them and everybody's got more money than us.
We didn't have to sign with them. Of course, everything sparked with them, and all the labels came to the table when we were chasing the band around, which is nice. And we could have went with anyone.
I swear one day we're gonna leave this town.
You could say from a business point of view, the naive mistake is to bring them over to England, pay for a tour, without having any futures with them. That's a crazy thing to do. But that's the philosophy of, well, you don't know us, so we're going to show you who we are. Not many people do that. I mean, it's the old, these people are really stupid. They don't know how to run a business. Or it's else, well, that's what makes them different.
Jeff and Jeanette were building a leaner, more efficient version of Rough Trade, whose independent reputation, combined with an uncharacteristically slick marketing operation, would prove a winning formula. The Strokes became the label's biggest signing since the Smiths, revitalizing an indie guitar band scene which, after the Britpop explosion of the 90s, had become stale and derivative. Five months after releasing the Strokes' first album, Rough Trade signed the Libertines, the edgiest English equivalent to their New York label mates, and began to build a diverse artist roster based on Jeff and Jeanette's musical tastes.
The only thing that we really have is our own response to the music, and to know that we think it's really special, it really moves us, and that's a rare thing, and that's it.
Records by the Libertines, British Sea Power, Belle and Sebastian, Arcade Fire and Anthony and the Johnsons helped to re-establish Rough Trade's reputation as an important independent label, and even brought them the odd award. But the biggest prize of all would come from their artist management arm.
When I get to Warwick Avenue, meet me by the entrance of the tube. We can talk things over little time.
Rough Trade, Jeff and Jeanette, had been managing Duffy for 4 years. When they met, she was a musical novice with a great voice, but seemed an unlikely addition to the Rough Trade roster.
You know, I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that I was wise when it came to music. I'm still not. I literally only discovered Nick Cave about 10 minutes ago downstairs. Massive, massive. And this happens to me all the time, you know. I come in, there's Joy Division records playing, I fall in love with it, they're playing Betty Swan. I came into this hub of credibility and didn't have a clue about anything. And I just thought I'd never been to anywhere so exciting in all my life.
Jeff and I both met her. I made a real connection with her, thought that she had a great voice and really liked her as a character, and felt that she had something really special that was really worth working with. But at that time, it wasn't quite right for me.
They kindly put me on a development deal. They just said, we'll look after you for a little while and just see what you want to do. No pressure, we're not going to make you do anything. We're not going to tell you what we want you to be. We're literally going to give you a little bit of time and a little bit of space to find out who you are as an artist.
That meant a fully funded apprenticeship for Duffy, but no record releases, and no income for Rough Trade. Yet another alternative approach to music industry convention. It was a risk, and it paid off.
It coincided completely with the music industry being completely wrecked by Pop Idol and X Factor and all that kind of complete rubbish that completely patronises all the people out there who've got technical ability and some kind of sense of humanity and a soul, and aren't being given any opportunity to nurture it into great music, because it's been nurtured into just cans of beans to put on a shelf.
I love you.
She wasn't manipulated or cultivated, you know, like a Pop Idol person. No one held her hand and took her to a writing session and said to her, write a song in the style of this. She was just given time to develop.
What fascinates me about it is that what would happen if you took somebody who could have been put into that situation and could have ended up a cabaret star, and was from a perfectly normal background, without a Rough Trade record collection, but just had a pure heart and a pure enthusiasm, and tried to nurture something great out of it.
You got me begging you for mercy. Why won't you release me? You got me begging you for mercy.
What happened was that after nearly 4 years of development for Duffy, and over 30 years of waiting for Rough Trade, they were rewarded with their first #1 single.
You got me begging you for mercy.
It is a dream to have something that's great, that's also popular. It was a great moment.
30 years since Rough Trade released its first single, it continues to attract a range of like-minded musicians inspired by its past, while Jeff and Jeanette focus firmly on its future.
Tonight I wanna celebrate with you.
This happens to be Rough Trade's 30th anniversary. They were started in 1978, and 1978 is the year that our drummer, Patrick Hallahan, and myself were born. I believe that since the beginning of both of our lives, we've been coming to meet at this moment in time.
Let him go, let him go, let him go from me.
There are bad labels and there are okay labels and there are great labels, and it was quite quickly evident which was which.
The most exciting thing for me was when we signed, because I didn't really realise that Jeanette was like part owner of Rough Trade. And I was kind of like, are you Jeanette Lee that was in Public Image Limited? She was like, I am indeed. She poured me a little glass of champagne. And that was exciting. It was like, rather than meeting a guy in a suit, you're meeting the person that played in Public Image Limited. And the guy who signed you's the guy who was sitting in the room when they made the Raincoats album.
It's kind of flattering that anyone's interested in the past and what used to happen, but it's not really much concern to us. The important thing is to live in the present and in the moment, and the only thing that's really important is what happens now, what happens next. And, you know, we've got in the pipeline so many good things, which you ultimately will be the judge of when they come out.
Sort of getting back in touch, and it's a pretty good feeling. Yeah, it feels pretty good. I get a lot of double takes when I'm coming around the corners, and it's mostly pretty nice. Yeah, it's mostly pretty alright, because most kids give me credit for being down with it.